Good morning and welcome to this webinar on the IMAP Awards. We thought, since this is the third year we've run them and there's increasing interest in participating in the awards, it would be good to run this session to explain a little about the awards, how they work, the purpose of them, the goal of and the reasons why you should participate. And it's also a good opportunity for us to invite one of the judges to talk about the judging process, how we evaluate managed accounts, and how we compare one to another. For us to talk a little about the role of the licensee awards, and in that context also to introduce James Waterworth from BlackRock, who for the first time this year, as a sponsor, as a long-term sponsor of the licensee award, are making their Aladdin risk management technology available to licensees. And I've asked James to participate today in talking about Aladdin. It's a piece of institutional level software which we think will give real depth and insight to portfolio managers who specialise in managed accounts for their advice business. So the details of the awards are on the screen for you. Entries close towards the end of this month on the 26th. And we're gambling on being able to get together in person in Sydney on the 27th of August at the Amora for the awards evening. If you have questions as we go through today, don't hesitate to fire them off as we're going. On the screen, you'll see a little icon of showing an arrow pointing down to the Q&A. If you run your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see that you can click the Q&A button and that will appear for each of the presenters. Today will be a relatively brief webinar, but you know, let's before I hand over to Nigel, let me just say that the awards have been a really important part of IMAP's work in trying to make managed accounts better understood. And in doing what we think is actually an essential part, which is recognising the excellence of the investment process that goes into portfolio management in a managed account context, and recognising that managed accounts aren't simply unit trusts without a unit price, but are themselves a quite discrete part of the investment management universe. Our last fund census for managed accounts showed that these now equate to about $80 billion. And I would expect, as we do the June census later on this year, that we'll see that despite the adverse market circumstances that managed accounts, like all investment products, have experienced, that the growth in use of managed accounts and the flow means that I would expect to see an increase in total FUM in managed accounts, partly because these really have been a far better way for advisors to deliver their advice in an implemented way. So the format for today's webinar session is I'll ask Nigel, as one of our judges, to talk about the judging criteria, how he and his fellow judges, Brad Matthews, Dragana Timotevich, Amanda Munro, Dominic McCormack, and I, together with FE Fund Info, assess portfolios. And then I'll hand over to James Kingston from BlackRock, who will talk, as I said before, about Aladdin. That's being made available to all finalists in the licensee category. So now it's my pleasure to hand over to Nigel Douglas, coming from his front lawn with the backdrop of Sydney Harbour behind him, to talk about the judging criteria.
Okay, thanks, Toby. Now, if you move to the next slide, please. So I'm going to give an overview of the criteria, then talk about the specific factors that we look at and we've used over the last few years, and then give a brief summary of how the judging process works. So just turning to the overview. So it's really a mix of qualitative and quantitative factors. We use proven rating criteria. We've all got experience assessing fund managers and portfolios of all types over the years. So we concentrate on areas such as process, investment philosophy, people, track record, and fees. Now for these awards, we use fixed weights. So the qualitative factors 70% and the quantitative factors 30%. Now there's sort of nothing magic in that mix, but I can just say that really comes from experience here. And for licensees, though, we put more weight on qualitative factors, and I'll explain that a bit later. The Innovation Award, however, everything is qualitative because we're looking for things that are going to make a difference. Now, it's important to point out that the peer group that we're looking at for these awards is really confined to the award entrants. So it's important to have a wide range of entrants each year. But we are mindful actually of the broader universe of funds, particularly in the specific asset class categories like equities. Now, client collateral advocacy of the managed accounts are recognised in the way we make assessments across really all the awards. Okay, turning to the specific factors. So for the general award categories, which are asset class and multi-sector portfolios. So we're covering asset classes like Australian large cap equities, small caps, and a range of fixed interest strategies. We look at, it's very important to understand the investment philosophy and the risk return objectives of the portfolios and how they're designed and whether they're reasonable. Particularly important in multi-asset, where we focused really on the balanced fund as a flagship strategy. Then we look at the quality of the investment process. How repeatable is it? Is it coherent with the investment philosophy and the objectives? And for multi-asset, of course, we're going to be trying to understand how the strategic asset allocation is put together. What sort of work has gone into deriving that. We're expecting a high standard of analysis to support that. And which asset classes are included. Obviously, managed account space, you're really confined to certain types of asset classes and the way they interact with platforms. And then tactical asset allocation or dynamic asset allocation and rebalancing of portfolios, that needs to be understood in the context of the way managed accounts actually run. It is difficult generally for people to add a lot of value from TAA. Now, people quality is something that you'd all be familiar with. Looking to see, is the investment team skilled and well qualified and well led, appropriately compensated, so their incentives are alignment with clients. Pretty well, most cases here, we have investment committees that support quite small investment teams. And, we look at the mix of the people on those investment teams, and sometimes actually members of the panel are on the investment committees, so they have to rule themselves out for those sort of considerations. And then governance is important as well. So when we're considering the firms that are involved, we're looking to get awareness of how they behave in regulatory environments and whether they've had any breaches, for example, with regulators. But generally, that's pretty well fine for most entrants. Now, client collateral I mentioned before. We see that from all the entrants, and they're really looking to see, how well does it explain performance, what's happening in the market in clear-cut terms, and how engaged are the award entrants with managed accounts, and explain that part of what they do in their materials. In multi-asset, it's a bit more challenging because there's obviously a range of asset classes. So we're looking to see, do the entrants, explain that well across the board. Now, innovation by its nature should be exciting and interesting, and we're looking for genuine innovation. There's a lot of copying goes on, but there are some cases of genuine innovation, and we've seen that in areas such as technology. And rather than the panel operating in a bubble, which is a very topical word these days, we're out there, particularly Toby with his connections, testing whether these innovative entrants, how they are seen by licensees, custodians, platforms, and other people. I guess Toby, leading figures in the industry there. So just moving to the next slide on quantitative factors. Well, this is, in terms of track record, we do find that given the managed accounts being a fairly recent development itself, the track records tend to be fairly short, around 1 to 2 years, I'd say, on average. So we need to take account of that. And here we're doing quite straightforward analysis against benchmarks and portfolio objectives. We are a bit mindful, actually, of the funds under advice that are being run as well by participants, and whether that has any impact on the particular performance. And also, of course, the market environment in which the performance is being run. So, for example, in Aussie equities, prior to the recent sell-off, it can be a bit hard to judge performance in an equities bull market only. So you have to think ahead as to how portfolio would perform in bear market conditions as well. And that's where experience is very useful. Now, on the fee side, IMAP, Toby and Jenny have input here, particularly in doing a weighted average for the fees, the model management fees, by client balance categories. And most of that weight tends to be in mid-sized portfolio, I would say 250,000, 500,000 type balances. So that provides really a good comparison for pricing across the portfolios. And we just take a very simple approach here in just looking at just the last year in terms of fees. Although we could have a judgmental discussion on the direction of fees, and the peer comparison is important in judging the entrants that have entered for a particular year. So just moving on to the judging process itself. So the judges, for our pains, are flooded with a lot of information, and we do welcome that, from the entrants, because it is a way for us to gauge how seriously they're taking it, the process. And so what we have is a prescribed submission template, which is like an FSC questionnaire, which covers all that qualitative criteria I discussed, a quantitative template on performance, and a few other factors, and then examples of the client collateral. And what the panel then does is, to meeting over a few months, is digest all that material and form a view by consensus. So each panel member essentially ranks the entrants by scoring them. And we have also drawn on quantitative analysis from FE Fund Info, who bring that quant template together. And also this year, BlackRock will be participating providing the judges with portfolio analysis, and James will explain that in a bit more depth, so that'll be great. Because as this is becoming more sophisticated, and we drill down into understanding portfolio performance, we need an efficient tool to do that. And then for licensee and innovation awards, recognizing how special they are, and the emphasis on client engagement, particularly there. We do have the finalists are asked to do a video interviews with the judging panel. So, and it's very important there, to be punchy and get across the message clearly, because it's pretty competitive, and we're expecting that the entrants are really high quality when they're being selected at that final stage. So overall, it's a fairly comprehensive and detailed process, and now we've been doing it for a few years. We think we've really sorted out a fairly streamlined process, and the judging panel has a good mix of people, and that means that there's some decent debate as well before we reach that consensus. So on that note, I'll hand back to Toby, or we go straight to James.
Great. Thanks very much, Nigel. So just before I hand over to James, a couple of questions have come in. One from Michael, who said, do we look at model returns, or do we only use sort of the client actual implemented returns?
Yeah, we actually look at, well, we're talking about models.
Yeah.
So that's what we look at. We want to get representative returns. I mean, they're not IMAs, so we're not looking at individual client returns.
Yeah. And that, and to that end, we're trying to produce a manageable process which allows us to assess the way in which this portfolio could be implemented, but we're ignoring, as Nigel said, specific client implemented returns, experience returns, because those are often influenced by cash flow factors that are specific to that client. We're also ignoring issues, for example, such as individual client directions, no tobacco stocks, or can't sell my BHP or whatever. We're looking at the, if you like, the archetypal experience that a client would have had. To emphasise a point which Nigel made, the judging panel, we've asked people to be involved, and they do it as a matter of, giving back to the industry. We've asked them to be involved. They aren't paid, but those people who are involved as judges, Nigel, Brad, Dominic, Dragana, Amanda, are those who are actively involved in portfolio management themselves. And that gives us a depth of knowledge and experience, which is just simply invaluable. Second question here, the 1 to 2 year performance seems too short a time frame. Is that the only analysis for performance? The issue is, of course, what we're trying to do is recognise excellent portfolio management process. Unfortunately, at this time, for many portfolios, that's what's available. There are a few portfolios, I think, here of JB Weir, for example, or of Watershed or Elston, who do have a 10-year track record. Some of the Paradigm portfolios from Melbourne. But because managed accounts have been so much more used to such a greater extent lately, many portfolios have a shorter time frame. And finally, there's a question from Nick: can we enter multiple categories, Australian equities and multi-asset? The answer is absolutely. And in fact, we have entrants who submit the same portfolio both in the licensee category and in the pure multi-asset class category, for example, or Australian equities and licensee. we're looking to recognise excellence in that particular class. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to James Waterworth from BlackRock. As I say, for the first time this year, we're delighted to be able to offer institutional analysis of portfolios in the licensee category. And James is going to take us through what that means and the benefits as a licensee that you'll receive from that. James, over to you. You're on mute.
Fantastic. Thank you, Toby, and also thank you to Nigel. Unfortunately, my background's a little bit too corporate versus Nigel there sitting in Fort Denison. So again, thank you very much for having BlackRock here today, and thank you for the introduction. Before I kick off, I just hope everybody is safe and well, further enjoying the increasing freedoms. Like many of my colleagues, I spend a considerable amount of time and energy talking to our clients about portfolio construction, and BlackRock is delighted to be associated with the whereby, and this is what Nigel and Toby have mentioned, we will provide data analytics to the judges for their assessment of the 5 finalist portfolios. Over the next few slides, I'll provide a quick insight into this service that we've brought to bear to the Australian wealth market in recent years. So next slide, please, Toby. Fantastic. This slide provides a high-level snapshot of our service, which is named, it's always a mouthful in anything regarding financial services, BlackRock Portfolio Analysis and Solutions. We call it BPAS for short. In summary, our service provides a risk lens to assess portfolios in tandem with better understanding client outcomes. For example, and Toby mentioned this earlier, so we utilize our proprietary risk management system called Aladdin. Aladdin is an end-to-end operating system that we utilize to review the whole portfolio and understand risk exposures. The whole portfolio focus spotlights the importance of asset allocation, and Nigel sort of talked about that on the SAA importance. And we find that it provides a very useful reporting output for researchers and CIOs, etc. Please, Toby. So just like no two portfolios are exactly the same, nor are our client engagements, though they tend to rhyme, and we have bucketed some of the more common accounts. For Australian wealth clients, the portfolio X-ray, if you will, is the most popular, and that's what we'll be providing to the judges. And that's shown here by number 1. And this really drills down into better understanding portfolio risk and asset allocation. From here, we tend to find the process is iterative, depending on what an investor seeks to do. For example, incorporate new asset classes or launching a new model, mitigate certain risks, reduce costs, etc. We have found in recent times that ESG has moved to the forefront, and so too income, particularly in this low rates environment with the backdrop of the equity dividend cuts too. Commercially, this is a value add service whereby an investor has an exposure to BlackRock product as part of this finalist series, though, that we'll be doing this. As part of that. Alternatively, we can enter into a partnership agreement, for example, whereby we are the primary passive manager, or we have a straight fee-based arrangement too. But as I mentioned, for the 5 finalists, this output will be provided to the judges for their consideration. Just one more slide from me. Thanks, Toby. What does the output look like? So here you can see a snapshot of the data the judges will receive. From a risk lens, we can assess the portfolio in its entirety, as well as drill down into asset classes, factors, etc. Done both historically and on a forward-looking basis. What tends to be most popular, there was a question there earlier, is, is 1 to 2 years too short of a time frame? What we can do is, through our stress testing, is look at both historical and hypothetical scenarios, though I would caveat that these are instant shocks through our system, and we fully appreciate, I'm sure the judges will as well, is that you'll be adapting your portfolio throughout any distressed market. So that's it from me. If there's anything that I've mentioned today that's of interest, please feel free to contact me or your BlackRock relationship manager. And lastly, we wish you all the best of luck through the submission process. So thank you, Toby.
Great. Thanks very much, James. So as I mentioned, this is a service which BlackRock would normally make available. And in fact, I think I saw a news item that one of the major custodians has recently adopted Aladdin as part of their service for institutional clients. So if you're considering entering the licensee category, this is a valuable service which you'll receive, and you'll have a chance to talk with the BlackRock team about it, which the judges will take into account in their consideration. So look, I'd encourage you to participate. You'll learn more about your own processes. You'll have a chance to demonstrate the value which you are creating for your clients in the provision of managed accounts. We think of managed accounts as being implemented advice. We think of managed accounts as being an essential tool of the advice-giving process, and in fact, the place in which investment management skills, portfolio construction skills, and advice come together to create portfolios that are directed at achieving particular client outcomes. So I'd encourage you to participate. Finalists and obviously winners get our little where are we? Our logo to use for from that point on, and I know a number of finalists and winners use that as part of their standard email and other materials, and we're delighted for them to do so. The winners in each category, and the categories, as Nigel said, are Australian equities, small caps, fixed interest, international, and multi-asset class, as well as licensee and innovation. The winners will be invited to participate in the portfolio management conferences in Sydney and Melbourne, and this year Perth, as one of the presenters in the appropriate sessions. So that's an opportunity for us to provide exposure. So before I wrap up, there's one final question. Now, not to worry. So look, Nigel, thank you very much. And thank you on behalf of all the judges who, as I say, contribute significant amounts of time and, of course, their knowledge and expertise in trying to advance the cause of this. James, thank you for participating today, and thank you to BlackRock for not only sponsoring the licensee award, but for making Aladdin available in that to those finalists. To those of you who've joined us today, thanks very much for doing so. If you have questions, don't hesitate to give me or Jenny Pimlett a call and discuss your questions. So thanks very much. We'll look forward to those entries flying in by the 26th of June.